The towering skyscraper of Harrington Global dominated the city skyline like a steel titan. Inside, marble floors gleamed under the soft golden light, and glass walls stretched endlessly, reflecting both power and wealth. Every employee who walked into the building knew one rule: never, ever cross Richard Harrington. Richard Harrington wasn't just a billionaire. He was a force of nature. Ruthless, brilliant, feared. He had built his empire from the ground up, clawing his way through boardrooms with nothing but sheer determination and a glare sharp enough to slice through steel. His words were law, his decisions unquestionable, and his temper, legendary. Executives who had dared oppose him in meetings had found themselves demoted, transferred, or quietly escorted out of the building by the end of the day. Even his closest advisors knew better than to challenge him. So when the clock struck 9 and the boardroom filled with the company's top brass, the atmosphere was thick with nervous energy. Richard stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his custom-tailored suit perfectly pressed, his silver watch glinting under the lights. He didn't speak at first. He never did. He let silence crush the air until everyone fidgeted, reminding them who owned the room. Finally, he leaned forward. "Numbers," he barked. A trembling finance officer began his report, voice quivering as he detailed quarterly earnings. The company had grown, but not enough to satisfy Richard. His eyes narrowed, lips curling in disdain. "Pathetic," he muttered, cutting the man off. "Billions spent, and this is what you bring me? Do you call this growth?" The officer lowered his gaze, sweating bullets. No one dared defend him. Richard's tirade continued. He slammed his fist on the table, rattling coffee cups. "I don't pay for mediocrity. I don't pay for excuses. You either deliver, or you're done. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," came the collective murmur. Not a single soul dared to raise their voice. And then, something unusual happened. The glass doors at the far end of the room opened quietly. In stepped a woman no one had ever seen before. She wore the plain gray uniform of the janitorial staff. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her face bore the softness of someone who had lived a hard life but carried herself with quiet dignity. She pushed a cleaning cart, eyes scanning the spotless floor. Clearly, she hadn't expected a meeting in progress. Yet instead of backing out nervously, she continued moving toward the corner, humming faintly under her breath as she arranged her supplies. Every executive froze. Their eyes darted from Richard to the woman. This was dangerous. Richard stopped mid-sentence, his face turning stone cold. "What," he said slowly, "is this?" The woman glanced up, calm. "Just cleaning, sir. During my meeting." His voice dropped lower, a dangerous growl. The room held its breath. Secretaries had been fired for less. One word from Richard, and this woman's entire livelihood would vanish. But instead of shrinking back, the woman gave a small shrug. The floor needed it. A gasp rippled through the boardroom. Richard Harrington straightened to his full height, his icy gaze fixed on her. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady. "You're the man everyone is too scared to talk back to." The room went silent. A pen clattered from someone's hand. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not in private, let alone in front of his entire board. Richard's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. "And you're the cleaning lady who just signed her resignation." The executives shifted uncomfortably, expecting security to storm in any moment. But the woman didn't flinch. She kept wiping the already spotless glass wall, her movements unhurried. "Funny thing about fear," she said softly, almost to herself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "It makes people small. It makes them forget they have voices. And it makes leaders forget that power is borrowed, not owned." Richard's smirk faltered. For the first time in years, someone had spoken words that cut through his armor. The boardroom was frozen in stunned silence. Executives exchanged wide-eyed glances, torn between awe and terror. Who was this woman? Richard clenched his jaw, forcing a laugh that carried no humor. "You think you're brave," he hissed. "You're nothing. You're a nobody who cleans floors." The woman finally turned, her eyes calm, unshaken. "Maybe," she said, "but even nobodies see what others are too afraid to say." Her words hung in the air like a blade suspended above him. For the first time, Richard Harrington felt the ground shift under his feet. The silence after the cleaning lady's words was deafening. Executives shifted in their seats, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Richard Harrington's jaw twitched, his usual air of control slipping ever so slightly. For decades, he had built an empire on fear. He was the storm no one dared challenge. And yet here she was, this plain woman with a mop and bucket, speaking to him as though he were just another man. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Get out," he he ordered, his voice cold. The woman didn't move. She calmly finished wiping the glass wall, set the cloth neatly on her cart, and then turned to face him fully. "No," she said. Gasps broke out again. One executive nearly choked on his coffee. Nobody told Richard Harrington no. Richard stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "Excuse me." Her gaze didn't waver. "You heard me. I'm not leaving. You can fire me if you want, but I won't walk out just because you raised your voice." For the first time in years, Richard Harrington didn't know how to respond. The boardroom sat frozen in disbelief. Finally, Richard gave a sharp nod. "Fine, stay, watch. You'll see what happens to people who cross me." He turned back to his executives, barking orders, dissecting numbers, dismissing suggestions with his trademark cruelty. But something had changed. His words didn't land the same. Every time his voice rose, eyes flickered toward the cleaning lady, who stood quietly in the corner, arms folded, watching with unnerving calm. And Richard knew it. Her presence was a mirror he couldn't escape. That evening, Richard sat alone in his penthouse office overlooking the city. Usually, the glittering skyline filled him with pride. Tonight, it felt hollow. Her words echoed in his mind. "Power is borrowed, not owned." He scowled, trying to drown the memory in a glass of whiskey. Who was she, really? What gave her the right to talk to him like that? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant entered, hesitant. "Sir, about the cleaning staff, the new woman." "What about her?" Richard snapped. "She's unusual. No employment history with the usual agencies. She only started last week." And, the assistant swallowed nervously. "Some of the staff say she's different. Like she doesn't belong here." Richard leaned back, intrigued despite himself. "Find out everything about her." "Yes, sir." As the assistant left, Richard stared at the city once more. He couldn't shake the feeling that this woman wasn't just a cleaning lady. The next morning, whispers rippled through the building. Word of the confrontation had spread like wildfire. Employees who had lived in fear for years suddenly felt a spark of something dangerous, hope. In the cafeteria, groups of workers exchanged hushed conversations. "Did you hear what she said to him?" "I heard she told him he wasn't as powerful as he thought. And he didn't fire her on the spot." Impossible. For the first time, Richard Harrington's invincible image had a crack. And the woman, whose name, they now learned, was Elena, became the quiet subject of awe. She went about her duties without fuss, mopping floors, wiping windows, collecting trash. Yet everywhere she walked, conversations paused. People glanced at her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Elena, for her part, remained calm, never drawing attention to herself. But her presence carried an undeniable weight. Meanwhile, Richard's investigation yielded little. No social media, no traceable background. Her references were vague, almost fabricated. Late one night, Richard sat in his office surrounded by reports. Frustration burned through him. Who was this woman? Why did she unsettle him so deeply? As if summoned, a soft knock came at the door. He looked up, and there she was. Elena. She held a cleaning rag in one hand, her expression calm. "Still working?" Richard bristled. "You think you can just walk into my office?" "You left the light on," she said simply, stepping inside. She set down her bucket, began polishing the edge of his desk as though nothing were unusual. Richard stood, fury bubbling in his chest. "What game are you playing?" Elena met his gaze. "No game, just the truth. You built your empire on fear, Mr. Harrington. But fear doesn't last forever. It always eats itself." Her voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any insult. Richard's hand clenched into a fist. "You know nothing about me, don't I?" she asked. Her eyes were steady, filled with something he hadn't seen in years, compassion. "You started as a man who wanted to prove himself. But somewhere along the way, you forgot what it meant to be human." Her words struck like lightning. For a moment, Richard saw flashes of his past, his humble beginnings, the nights he went hungry, the years of struggle before the empire. Memories he had buried beneath layers of pride and ruthlessness. He snapped back, snarling, "Enough. Get out." This time, Elena didn't resist. She simply picked up her bucket, paused at the door, and said, "I'll leave. But remember this, a man who cannot be questioned is already weak." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Richard shaken. The next days were chaos. Richard barked louder in meetings, desperate to reassert control. But the harder he pushed, the more his people resisted in subtle ways. Executives exchanged knowing looks. Managers hesitated to obey. Whispers filled the halls. Elena had planted something dangerous, doubt. And Richard couldn't silence it. One afternoon, Richard stormed into the lobby after a disastrous call with investors. His temper was a live wire. Employees scattered out of his way. But at the center of the lobby, Elena was kneeling, scrubbing the marble floor. She didn't move aside. Richard stopped, his fury boiling over. "Why are you still here? I should have fired you weeks ago." Elena looked up calmly. "Because you haven't." The lobby fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned to watch. Richard's chest heaved. "Give me one reason I shouldn't end this right now." Elena rose to her feet, cloth in hand. She faced him squarely, her voice firm. "Because deep down, you know I'm right. You know you've built walls so high that you've forgotten what's on the other side. And you're terrified that one day, those walls will fall." Her words cut through the air like thunder. The crowd of employees stared in awe. Never had anyone dared speak to him like this, not once, not twice, but again and again. Richard's face was pale with rage, and something else. Something he couldn't admit even to himself, fear. He turned, sharply, retreating into the elevator without another word. The doors closed, but the damage was done. The cleaning lady had silenced the billionaire CEO, again. And this time, the whole company had seen it. That night, Richard poured himself another drink in his penthouse, staring into the amber liquid as though it held answers. He hated her. He hated the way her words stripped him bare, the way her calm presence unsettled his entire empire. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to fire her. Why? Because a small, buried part of him knew, she was right. As he sat in silence, the city sprawling beneath him, Richard realized something terrifying. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. And Elena, she wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was the storm he never saw coming.